Hello and welcome back to Ensuring Success 2022. We are here in Dallas, Texas, presenting you with up to 14 hours of CPE credit for your year-end pleasure. I am Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor Magazine. And before we get started in this session, I'd like to mention our sponsors who make this event possible. They include ADP, Avalara, BotKeeper, Corpay One, CPA.com, Canopy, Caseware, Field Guide, eFile4Biz, Intuit, Right Networks, SafeSend, Sage, SureLink, TaxFile, TechGuru, Xero, and Zoho. So we want to thank all of them for making this event possible. In particular, we would like to thank CPA.com for making this session possible. They are the sponsor of this session. Regarding this session, if you plan to collect CPE credit for this session, we will be posting 3 CPE codes during the session. They will appear on the bottom of the screen, and you'll know they're there because you'll hear this sound. Okay, when you hear that sound, you need to write down the CPE code that we've given to you. There will be 3 of them. At the end of the day or the end of the week or whenever, next June, whenever you want to get your CPE credit, you'll come back to ensuringsuccess.com and click Get CPE Credit at the top of the screen. And you'll be taken to a form where you enter the codes that you received today. And then you'll click Go next to each session where you entered codes, and then Download. And you'll be able to download your CPE certificates right there on the site. I would also like to mention real quickly that we are on social media, #DecemberCPE. So feel free to talk about us to all your social media followers. This session is Reenvisioning Client Accounting and Advisory Services, or CAS. And I would like to introduce our speakers. I'll give you their names, and then I will let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So we have Kalil Merhib next to me, Sharrin Fuller, Aaron Berson, and then my co-moderator, Alexandra DeFelice. So would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Kalil Merhib. I'm with CPA.com. I lead professional services and growth and have spent my entire professional career helping firms through change management, technology adoption, and business strategy, and excited to be here today for this conversation around the very exciting category of CAS.
Sharrin Fuller, CEO of Glass Wallet Ventures. My explanation of myself the last session was terrible, so I will just go a little bit further this time. I actually started a firm in 2006. It was a remote originally. It was acquired 2021. And then in last year, I started Glass Wallet. And what I do is I specialize in helping businesses build and be ready for their exit strategy, typically acquisition. So I make sure that you're completely in line, ready to go, and then also coach you through the acquisition process.
Hi, I'm Aaron Berson, CEO of Fringe Advisory. We do basically everything from the back office, from accounting to tax work for our small business clients. Kind of started Fringe Advisory a few years back after building the same CAS practice at a top 20 accounting firm, top 200 accounting firm, and then 2-person accounting firm. So kind of have some experience at every level there.
And I'm Alexandra DeFelice, Director of Marketing and Business Development for Payne & Fears Law Firm in Southern California and co-moderator with Gail Perry. I also do have a brief announcement that came in from our tech folks, which is that if you want to refresh your page on the stream, it will allow you to more easily see polling questions when we have them for sessions, as well as the answers to questions that you might ask.
Okay, so everybody do a quick refresh, and we'll be back in 5 seconds.
Wait, do we need to trademark that? Can we do the Jeopardy sound? Is that allowed?
Oh, I don't know. We may have to pay royalty.
I don't know, but
it was a tribute to Alex.
If you sing it out of tune, I think it's okay.
I only know how to sing out of tune, so we're safe.
But Gail, since I did say that, why don't I just launch a poll right now to just take the pulse of the audience to ask them how they would
see if it works.
Yeah, how would you describe the current state of your CAS practice?
Okay.
And
we haven't told you what a CAS practice is yet, but let's do that.
Yeah, well, if they don't know, then they're going to put NA, we don't provide CAS services, I just want the CLE.
All right.
CPE.
CPE.
Sorry.
Love that brutal honesty.
All right. While you're answering that, I also want to mention that at the bottom of your screen, the window where you're watching us, there's an Ask a Question box, and we would be delighted if you would ask us a question. You can ask questions to our speakers. If you have a tech problem, you can ask questions to our tech team who is standing by to help you with any issues you may be having with your display. And if you just want to comment on what you're thinking about what we're talking about, feel free to do that. So, since we are talking about CAS, and I kind of teed this up already, let's talk about what do we mean by CAS. And I'm hearing CAS 2.0, and I didn't even know there was a 1.0. So let's break this down.
I just learned that too, so
Okay.
don't feel bad. They just taught me in the green room that 2.0 is a thing, so
All right,
I'll let them lead.
All right, let's kick this off with what are we talking about here?
Well, at least at CPA.com, because there are a lot of different definitions of CAS that we're hearing quite a bit from firms and in the profession, but we're really talking about the client accounting and advisory services. We've oriented around client advisory services because we believe that the accounting piece of that is sort of assumed because that needs to happen within the business. And this is all about the outsourcing of the finance and accounting function, all of those core business processes for business clients, but with the intention also of going a little bit deeper with clients around insights around their business, their industry, how to do things like get ready for an acquisition perhaps, and other financial planning and analysis in the like. So that's how we're really just defining CAS at CPA.com.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I mean, really, it's, in my opinion, anything that's advisory, that's beyond the transactional and the everyday from what we typically do, is kind of getting to that trusted advisor level, if you will, where you're dealing with more than just, here's your balance sheet, great, or here's your tax return, have a nice day, and you're actually digging into a little bit more with the individual or the business owner.
Yeah, and I'll agree with both of them. My definition is you're the expert in your field, whatever that is, and it could be really in any business. But if we're talking about accounting today, it could be, it could even be HR in our field. It could be tax. It could be financial planning. As long as you're the expert, and I really see advisory as, as accountants, we're all reactive. We were talking about this. We're reactive. We're handling things after the fact. For me, advisory is proactive. You're getting ahead of it. You're trying to advise of what is upcoming.
Yeah, what I would say is not CAS, at least when we think about it. It's not necessarily after the fact work or quarterly or annual work. That's just kind of a means to clean up the books to get to a tax return. It's much more holistic than that, and it does oftentimes lead to the conversations with clients around these other advisory services, human capital management, risk advisory, cyber, et cetera. So that's at least a little bit more about what the intention of what you're trying to do for your client is.
Yep. Absolutely. We're on the same page here. Yay!
I love that. All right. I love that a lot.
So with that, Gail, do you want me to just share the results with the audience in terms of where everyone is with their CAS practice,
Absolutely.
and then you can go on to your next question?
Yeah.
So 47% said that they don't do it at all, but 20% said they're getting started, and another 13% said that they want to build one.
Okay.
How many don't care and just want the CPE?
Balance.
Enough that
No.
it leaves
That leaves about 20%.
I'm calling you out.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
I know. Sorry.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about the evolution here of CAS, where it's been, where it's going? And we have that slide if you want to pull it. Do you want me to pull that up?
Sure. Yeah, the CAS maturity model?
Yeah. Okay. I'm calling to the tech room. We would like to have that slide. While they're preparing that, actually, I'm going to give them two jobs at once. So we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsor, CPA.com. When we come back, we'll give you the first CPE code for this session, and then we'll show you the slide we've been teasing you about.
CPA.com introduced client advisory services over a decade ago. Now we're leading the way with CAS 2.0, a holistic approach providing the vision, insights, and solutions firms need to expand the way they advise clients. See how we can help you transform your CAS practice with CAS 2.0. Learn more at cpa.com/CAS2. Empowering trusted advisors with business and technology solutions.
All right, we are back, and this at the bottom of the screen is your first CPE code for this session. Be sure to record this 3-digit code. There will be 2 more before the session is over. All right, and Kalil, I'm going to let you describe what this slide is that we're displaying, because you're the one who gave this to me.
Yeah, absolutely, Gail. So this is CPA.com's CAS practice maturity model, and it's evolved over the years. So, over a decade plus ago, as cloud technology started to really come onto the scene, the way firms and clients were working together and collaborating started to look very different. And what we've seen is a progression of the type of services that firms are starting to offer on a more consistent and scalable basis. So every firm I talk to probably looks up and to the right and says, I'm a trusted advisor for at least one of my clients. And this is a conversation in looking at how do you make all of your clients or most of your clients look like your best client. And so what you're seeing on the left there is some of the financial outsourcing components of a client accounting or advisory services engagement. And then as you move up into the right, you're starting to get into more strategy, business insights related elements of the CAS engagement. And I know for a lot of firms, where you get on this ramp or this maturity model, if you will, is very different. So Aaron, I know, for example, you've shared with me that you're already doing some of these things in several of these categories.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things to note between what we would call 1.0 and 2.0, really, if you look at it, one's looking backwards, one's looking into the future, right? And then that's just the tip of the iceberg there, right? So like CFO finance, right? That's the very early stage of that. Then you go beyond that, which is more holistic into what is the business owner looking to get out of life, not just out of the business. What are they looking to do the next stage, and really get back to, what I joke around about, the CAS OG, which is back in like the 1970s, 1960s, when an accountant was the first person someone called when they were thinking of doing anything with finances, or the accountant was getting invited to their weddings, their kids' birthday parties, and they were a real part of the family, essentially. I feel like we have to get back to that, where we're in this constant cycle of talking to people, not just monthly, quarterly, or annually, but, and yeah, to your point, I've done it at every level here, basically. But I think that's the real big challenge that I think a lot of people are struggling with, is getting back to that OG level, if you will.
So a lot of firms, I take that back. There are a handful of firms I know of that are just all in on CAS, and they're like raising the bar, setting the bar for the rest of the profession. In general, though, across the board, do you have any statistics on accounting firms and where they are on this journey on average?
So not particularly where the firm is maybe on this maturity model. What I would say is most firms that are intentional about their CAS strategy. So they have a dedicated practice leader. It's a standalone practice within the firm. They have dedicated resources. They have, consistency in how they're delivering the service. All of those things go into the definition of an intentional CAS practice. What we do see is that firms are operating, again, at a lot of different levels. Most firms today, I don't think, are consistent or scalable in the way they're delivering services much beyond the controllership function. And this idea of productizing services at the advisory level can oftentimes be a challenge to think about in that regard.
I agree. We were talking about that a little bit earlier, that I feel like when we're talking about this subject, the issue is not necessarily the service that's provided, it's you realizing what you can provide and then turning your clients from those transactional and seeing you from being a transactional provider to an actual trusted advisor. It's sometimes that's a difficult road to navigate, which is why we see so many people say, forget it, we're not offering this anymore, we're only offering this because these people want to live here and I want to live here, and they're not making the transition. So sometimes it's easier just to cut and run and start something new. For example, my last firm, we lived in those first three models. My glass wallet, it lives in the trusted advisor, and I am not taking it back to transactional whatsoever. I just want to advise you on how to get to the next step. So
where do we go on that journey? How do firms advance from the looking backward part of CAS to the looking forward part?
Well, this is exactly why CPA.com came up with CAS 2.0. It's a business model framework and methodology that starts to allow the firm to look at how do you build this practice area holistically. So it starts with the firm strategy and the governance structure that empowers innovation and enables people to dedicate time and resources, non-billable time. I know that's a four-letter word at times for firms. And so getting into the practice strategy elements and then the technology and operations. And so I think what we believe is going to help firms move up this model is really incorporating all of those into the way you're doing your business planning and looking at the complements between CAS and your other practice areas.
Yeah, I think it also starts with, to that point about recognizing what CAS, or what CAS 2.0 isn't. Right. So, and this kind of helps exemplify that. You know, a lot of people are doing controllership and calling it CFO services, or they're providing just a dashboard which is pulling financial, data and showing a graph of it. Right. That's not really insights for the business owner or actually getting to that next level of advising. That's just presenting the same financial information in a slightly different way. Right. So I think recognizing that it's more than just showing a financial dashboard. It's actually taking that financial dashboard and that financial information, marrying it with non-financial information, or understanding where that business owner wants to go to help them build a path to that, using that financial information, that dashboard as a tool to get there, and as a a roadmap versus just here it is and I'm doing CFO services because I gave you a pretty graph, right? Which a lot of people really do think that's what it is.
Yeah.
So those graphs are nice.
They're very pretty. Don't get me wrong. Some of them are
You
awesome.
love them. You're
I love
beyond
them.
pretty.
I geek out on all of them.
He was
I
just
geek
talking.
out on all of them.
There you go.
But that's not insights.
Well,
right?
and a trusted advisor, when you're building into that, that's a relationship. When you're going from transactional and you're actually getting in front of somebody and saying, "Let me tell you," you're really building that one-on-one relationship. Something that I don't feel at this point technology can take away. The transactional, as we talked about in my earlier session, that can completely be removed by technology for the most part. Trusted advisor, I think we're a while away. Unless a Will Smith movie comes in and wipes us all out, which is probably going to happen. But until then, we've still got this for another, couple decades maybe? I don't know.
I don't know. OpenAI has been doing some pretty cool things with ChatGPT. So I mean,
I don't. We'll be the last one standing.
If you played around with that, it's kind of scary. But that's a different session.
Yes,
not for this one.
I do have a few questions that came in from the audience. So I'm going to start with this one with Kalil, which is, the person said, how would you describe the difference between business advisory services and business coaching?
Well, I think there's an element of coaching in any advisory relationship, probably any consulting relationship as well. So we look at the kind of the holy grail here around that trusted business advisor relationship is getting to the point where you are coaching your client about what to do with their business. Oftentimes I say it comes at the intersection, and this is why actually niche focus is so critical. It's kind of the secret sauce in some ways to CAS, is because it's the intersection of where the business is in their business life cycle and the intersection of that and the industry trends for that particular. And if you think about it in that context, what should the business be thinking about based on the environment that they're operating in their vertical? And I also think another component is around the digital transformation. So most small and mid-sized businesses struggle to understand what technology to use, what processes to use. And so what you should be doing as that advisor is coaching the client when it's time to look at incorporating new technology and new capability to help then lead to those deeper business insights.
What I heard is coaching is advisory. I think advisory is just a more professional, legit way. Like if you say somebody, I am a trusted business advisor, to me, I feel I'm, okay, I'll give you my money. When you say I'm a trusted business coach, I'm thinking, what are you going to try to sell me? So I personally would say, I think the word advisor holds more clout, but in my opinion, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of a business coach, I think of someone who's more on the outside of the business, who's kind of layering in what they've seen and kind of poking and prodding to help someone be a better business person or do something a little bit better. Whereas to me, an advisor, specifically in CAS and everything, we're actually rolling up our sleeves and we're there, holding your arm, trying to figure out the problems and help you through it, versus just standing, on the sidelines coaching you essentially. So to me, it's more of, a little bit more hands-on than a little bit more guidance on the outside. So that's how I would separate those two.
So there was a comment, for those of you who are on the earlier session about tax advisory services and how is this different. So there's a comment that someone made, and I don't know if it's whether you agree with this comment or you correct them or give your own opinion, but they said, in the earlier session on tax advisory services, the underlying assumption was if not using Intuit, you were using outsourcing of premium tax services somewhere else. Here with CAS, the outsourcing sounds like overseas accounting services and you retain the consulting services.
I don't think it has to be that way.
Yeah, no.
I think you can have all of it. I think it depends on what you want your business model to be. A lot of people are dumping the transactional and only handling the advisory, but they still need to have that data to provide the advisory. So maybe they want to outsource that piece somewhere else that they know they could trust that. But no, there are plenty of firms that still absolutely keep that transactional portion because they know they can trust the data, but then they also have the advisory. I personally would keep them both. I mean, that way I control my data. But
it all starts with the data, I think, right? So if your strategy is you're going to staff and can profitably deliver the back office function as part of that CAS engagement, then by all means do that. Yeah. But I think this is also why we're seeing trends with augmenting the staff in that way, whether it's through a platform like BotKeeper that we just heard from, whether it's an offshoring strategy or working with a third party. But if you control the data from that perspective, then you control the quality, and now your advisory engagement becomes less ad hoc, relying on what the client has, and it becomes more managed in terms of what you're able to do consistently.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to the words we're using, right? Traditionally, when you say outsource, you're talking about offshoring, right? Or for the last 20 years, right, outsourcing was going to cheaper, labor overseas typically, right? When we're talking about outsourcing, we're talking about from the internal operations of a business, right? So instead of them having a finance person or an accountant sitting in their walls, we're sitting outside their walls, so outsourcing, right? Not necessarily overseas.
it could be a good friend's firm that does only transactional, and you give most
They
of
could be
us-
down the street. It doesn't have to be overseas. There are a lot of firms, though, that have adopted that model using, very skilled labor overseas because of the price to be able to, augment the AI and the technology to deliver a better product, but that's not technically what it is, if that makes sense.
Okay. We want to take a really quick break again to hear from our sponsor, CPA.com, and we'll be right back.
CPA.com's mission to drive transformation of practice areas, advance the technology ecosystem, and lead technology research and innovation is positioning firms for today and for the future. See how CPA.com is the accounting profession's trusted resource in the digital age. Learn more at CPA.com, empowering trusted advisors with business and technology solutions.
We are back, and we would like to share with you our second CPE code of the session. Thank you. Be sure to write down this code. It's appearing on the bottom of your screen. That will enable you to get your CPE credit for this session when it's over. So when we talk about a firm that's intrigued with the idea of doing advisory work, and they haven't really gone down the path yet of CAS 1.0, or however you want to describe it, the basic client accounting services, can they just jump in and do the client advisory services, or do they need to go down that path from the beginning?
So I'll say from CPA.com's perspective, you can certainly have a lot of different on-ramps to the way you start working with a client, right? But I do think back to the comment I had made right before the CPE break around this idea of ad hoc versus managed. I'll give you an example. Most large firms providing advisory, and small firms I'd say as well, have a CFO advisory level service that they do. They go in, they use the client's systems, they then pull reports, and then they advise based off the information that the client system gives them. That is is very hard to replicate because everything's a snowflake. It's unique from one client to the next. And so if you are looking at how do I build a scalable, fractionalized advisory practice, I think one of the critical elements is really starting with the data and building it. Now, you might have an offshoring or an outsourcing or a third-party data strategy, but that's at least how we look at it.
So can you describe this in a little more detail? Like, I want step one. I want to move in this direction tomorrow, starting tomorrow. Where do I start?
You decide to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is step one.
And
So you go into it with some intentionality.
I'm on board. I want to be CAS 2.0, but I don't do CAS at all.
So you're going to do it, and the number one is, what do you have an expert in? What are you passionate about? What do you want to advise? When you sit down and you say, who's my favorite client? Why are they my favorite client? And you realize, hey, this is my favorite client because I love my calls with them, because we get to talk this, and they love the information I give them. If you can identify that client that you love and what you love about them, you've identified more than likely what you're good at, what you're the expert in, and then you go from there. Identify the number one, identify what you're going to be the expert in, and then from there identify who else is an expert in what, and then identify which clients can actually fall into that space. But if you don't know what you're the expert in and you don't know what you're passionate about, then you're gonna sink, and you don't want to do that. But you should absolutely always be passionate about whatever you're advising in. If you're not passionate about it, don't advise in it. Honestly, just don't do it. You need to love it. Otherwise, I feel like you're going to be a poor advisor. It's my opinion, but I feel like I'm correct.
And I would say for a firm thinking about starting this as a practice area, that first, you should be looking for a dedicated practice leader. So that is absolutely a critical component. Second is, this is a standalone practice, so it needs representation in the firm at the same level as tax and audit and your other practice areas, because you're going to need to develop a firm strategy around what you want this practice to look like with what the practice is doing. So that's what I would say, dedicated practice leader.
So his section's really step one, and then my section's step two. I don't know. I feel like we're both like
a very close
together.
second.
I know.
That helps with everything you do.
I'm not passionate about anything.
passionate about not being passionate.
There we go.
But to Kalil's point, though, at one of my previous firms, when I was building this, that was one of the hardest things. Was we were building it. We had our practice lead, right? We were spearheading it, but we didn't have that seat at the table, right? So at a large firm, to start moving that needle in a meaningful way, it was near impossible without that seat at the table. So you had the same, buy-in conversation 200 times in a month to try to get that to move forward. But I think it also depends on what size firm you are.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what size firm are we talking about? If we're talking about large corporate, you can identify and then fill the seat. If you're talking about our smaller firms, that's maybe an owner with one or two people that are trying to transition, you're probably going to have less of your mine's probably be more number one, and then advise in number two. But you definitely always need, well, no, not really. If you're just an individual firm, you don't absolutely have to have that separate department. Like if I'm an owner and I've got a couple people and I want to offer this, you get rolling, you get it moving, you identify what you're good at, what you can speak to, you get it moving, you build it, and then as you build it, if you book them, they will come, for my Wayne's World fans there. Once you build it, then you can start adding in the people. But again, it really does depend what size of firm you have, because...
Does it also depend what kind of client it is?
Yeah, so I was going to say that if you're starting and you're, let's say a small firm, right? They don't know where to go. They're doing after the fact today. Right? How do they start getting into CAS from after the fact? Is one, like we said, decide to do it. Ideally, find a vertical that you're passionate in, but then start moving away from compliance. Like if today all you're doing is their monthly after the fact write up to do a sales tax return, that's not how you're starting from it. You're going to start from starting, day one in a month and saying, how can I help this client? And maybe start getting involved in bill pay, in actually how they're pricing things, and start having slightly different conversations around, instead of the goal is for the sales tax return, make the goal to have the conversation. Right? And I think that's how you start to shift and build that muscle around the advisory, because a lot of those people, they just don't have that muscle. right? So you have to start someplace.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that makes this practice area very differently. It's more of an outcomes-based conversation around how you're going to help them with their business than it is a deliverable-based engagement with clients. And so that leads, ideally, and that leads to another key thing that I think you need to do early on in the process, which is make sure you have the fortitude for change, right? Make sure that you are not going into this thinking you're going to look and measure a CAS practice the same way that you measure tax, with utilization and realization as your only two metrics, because it is a completely different business model. The way you price it, the KPIs that you use to measure the performance of it, and so I think it's all of those things. It's know who your client is, know what they're looking for, know how this is a different conversation, and make sure you have someone that's committed and passionate to lead this area.
Okay, so each one of those things could be like a half an hour follow-up question.
Absolutely.
So I'll start with a question that actually came through from the audience for Aaron in particular, which is how do you begin to approach your existing clients to interest them with your services? And then what are the services that you would offer to distinguish yourself to show additional worth? That might be a longer question that we might not be able to get to. I would say let's just focus.
Who needs to charge you for that one? That's a relationship advisory charge right there. But
let's focus on the first part, because as we talked about in the first session of the day, it's always like it's hesitancy of like, oh, now I'm a salesperson. How do I try to have that conversation with my existing clients?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that we've always done in the practices when we started them was start with your best client or the client you're closest with and be honest with them, right? So show some vulnerability and say, hey, I want to start doing this new service for you. Can you, knowing that, can you kind of be my guinea pig client and work through this with me? Right. I mean, and it works. I've had those conversations with clients. Usually, if you have a good relationship with them, they're excited to help you grow as well as get something from that relationship. But then also, I think one of the big things there is just identifying some way you could add value to the point of the question, right? Is that taking over some function that the client is currently doing? Is that just being another ear for them to, cry on, essentially? I joke around, a shoulder to think on, right? Like just they need some place to go to talk through things with. So I think just identifying that is kind of that step one, because then you start to build that relationship.
And then for Kalil,
no one likes
just temporarily. I know you're ready to fight, but we'll
I didn't really mean it.
In the list of things that you mentioned, which was a lot, which is pricing, which I'm not going to get to right now because we usually have a whole session on that. We're not this year, but is the KPIs. Can you mention for the audience some KPIs that you can measure to know if you're going down the right path and if you have to reshift?
Yeah, absolutely. So CPA.com just put out the 2022 CAS benchmark survey. So for those of you who have not had a chance to read it, you can go out and download that and take a look at it. But the number one KPI that's measured in that survey is net client fees per professional. Very similar to what's measured in the AICPA MAP survey, which is net client fees per FTE. So this is any client-facing resources, including equity partners in firms, that in what is the revenue per FTE. So here's the pretty astonishing outcome around that one that we saw, which is we look at the top 25% of the respondents for that particular metric. The average was $230,000 per professional versus the remainder of the respondents at $130,000, give or take. And so in the reason for that, when you start digging into more of the data and looking at it, is because the intentional business strategies, the dedicated resources, the investment in upskilling and education, the pricing models they're using, so it all correlates. But that's the number one KPI we look at.
Doesn't that still seem low, though? Because as a trusted advisor, like at $230,000, I'm thinking a trusted advisor in that role is being paid upwards of $150,000, right? So doesn't that seem like a low number?
Well, so I was actually going to say that. So we always looked at as a multiple of salary, right? As opposed to just per full-time, employee. Because to your point, someone you're paying $150,000, you expect more than $230,000 of profitability out of them versus someone you're paying $50,000 a year, right? So we always looked at, and I know traditionally in a lot of firms in non-CAS practices, right? You look at they target 3x salary, they end up getting 2 to 2.5 salary. In CAS, I mean, we target 5x salary.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're paying someone $100,000, we want to get $500,000 of value from them. Right. In theory.
I was going to ask, you have the KPI, but what's the metric there? What do they need to pay? What do you guys say that percentage needs to be? How much of their, like, what is the multiplier of, because you know what I'm trying to say? Am I making sense here?
Well,
how do you measure that KPI? What is the measure?
Sure. So the first thing I'll just comment on in terms of it being low, if you look at the most recent AICPA MAP survey in 2020, the average net client fees per FTE across all practice areas was around $200,000. So CAS has now eclipsed. Now we anticipate that to go up because of fee increases and other elements. But I would say, so from saying it's low, I wouldn't necessarily say that, because one thing it could indicate is a very strong leverage model with non-professional staff that are servicing clients with work being delegated down to them. Yeah. And the other component here that I think is really important is it's not a one-to-one ratio for that $150,000 trusted advisor. We're talking about a fractional service. So you bring in a CFO from industry and focus on your niche, and that CFO now can be a fractional CFO build out for that function across 5, 6,
that makes me feel a little better. You gave me anxiety with that number at first. I'm like, no, your business is going to go under. Sorry.
Yeah, and when we looked at that, salary ratios for client-facing professionals, right? So all the support staff and everyone who weren't production, people, they didn't get counted into that, right? So that's why that multiple was so much higher, right? Because you have your support staff, you have your non-client facing staff, you have your customer success managers and your project managers, and when you start to build out that team, one person interfacing with the client could actually be a team of 5, right? So like
Do you
it
try
depends.
to average? Sorry, this is a whole other thing. I'm just going to stop because I start hearing all the ratios. I think of the spreadsheet that I could be creating right now. I get really excited.
What about the graph?
All right, so
the pretty
Sharrin,
graph.
since you're itching for a question,
how
do you staff a CAS practice?
Oh man, I get that one. Okay, that's a hard one. It's passion, if you ask me. You have to be passionate about what you're doing, and typically I would look to what I already have. Who are my rock stars? Who are the ones that the clients keep calling, and you're like, quit taking their phone calls. You're supposed to be focusing here
and giving them free advice.
Yeah,
probably.
And they just keep taking the phone calls, and the clients write you, and they're like, hey, I love so-and-so. They just talked to me for 3.5 hours. I'm like, okay, that's your person. That's your person. The person that the person that just keeps, no matter what, building that relationship with the client. Find that person. You probably already have them. You know who they are. You're thinking of them in your head. That's your person number one. If you don't have that one, for me, it's a hard thing. I feel like you have to bring someone in or have a product already in place to identify who's going to sit and how they sit.
You can't really train like a worker bee to have this kind of insight.
No, it's definitely, because like we were saying, it's not a 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in this role, and which is, like we were saying, it's hard for accountants, right? It's a relationship based. It's a roll with the punches. It's a fake it till you make it. Sometimes maybe they throw something at you that you don't know, and you're just talking to them as you're Googling. I think I found the answer, but you don't want them to know that you're Googling. So help me here, guys. What do you got? What do you got?
Aaron looks like he disagreed. So,
Yeah, so I
Aaron
disagree
was
a little
no.
bit. Well, I forget how you said it, but
I said it wrong.
Training. Well, no, I just
The worker
disagree.
bee. It was
The
about
worker bee. Yeah, the
Okay.
worker bee comment. I think those are the people that we can train to be these advisors. But it's that upskilling conversation, right? The same conversation
but do
we've
they
had
want
for
to?
10 years.
I don't know.
Not all of them want
I
to.
find some of them that are like a Zoom call with a client, I'd rather die. Those ones I would never put in a trusted advisor position.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's not all of them.
It's the ones that want to get on the calls. Did I just say that?
No.
I think I said that quite a bit.
What I mean
Gail's
is,
shaking her head, and this is her thing.
is that you start with those people, because those are the people that know your clients.
Okay, so basically
Right.
we're saying we agree, we just said it differently. All right.
No,
You guys at home can vote.
Yeah, I
Say-
think we're gonna switch seats. No, but I think that's where you start staffing
Kalil
up
tiebreaker.
versus bringing someone external in
Okay.
who doesn't know your
Yeah,
clients.
no, I agree with you on that. Bringing in someone external is extremely hard. You don't know how they're going to fit. Like I said, you really just got to find that person within your firm that's very passionate about working with people, and like I said, the ones you can't get to hang up the dang phone.
So
Do you agree? Who do you agree with? Pick a side. Just remember, you're within kicking range of me.
No, I mean, the passion piece I agree with, and I also think, though, this is an empowerment opportunity for people within the firms as well. So, one of the things that we see is firms are having a lot of success going out and hiring a industry expert for the niche they want to focus in, that's been a CFO in industry, that can come in and already understand what those business insights are for the vertical. At the same time, the CAS practice of today is not the bookkeeping practice of yesteryear, right? So it is not the place where you don't want to go if you want to progress your career through a firm. This is the fastest growing practice area right now, and it's an area that 80% of the top 100 firms, from that large firm perspective, are going out and investing in heavily. And
Yeah,
so
I was going to say, a lot of what you're saying sounds really like a large firm, like going out and hiring that industry expert. The firm out there that's 3 people, they can't do that. They can't afford that at all.
Last week I was at our digital CPA conference, and I had a conversation at a round table with a 10-person firm in Louisville, Kentucky, and they were talking, they focus on restaurants, and they actually
Is it
went...
prefix?
It's not, but what they did is actually go out and they found a restaurateur client of theirs that wanted to do some consulting, and they formed a relationship where they were already doing the back office accounting work, and they formed a relationship with her to come in and be the trusted advisor. And so I think even small firms can
More
get
like
creative.
Fractional. Because I think as a small firm, I think, oh my, how am I going to afford this 6-digit salary to come in to build something revenue that we don't have, hoping it works out, and that is very stressful for small firms. So I was just saying, what's the workaround? How do we get it moving?
Well, I think that example in Louisville is a great example of a workaround. And the other thing is, the skill set looks different too than the traditional campus recruit that you'd hire in for tax and audit as well. So you could go to someone in the business school that may not have thought about being an accounting major. You could go to someone with a technology background. There's, I think, a lot of different creative ways that you don't have to go pull a 6-figure hire from industry as your first hire. I was giving that as an example.
No, I know. I just assume. I'm making assumptions of what everybody's thinking at home and trying to touch on all the people. Okay, that makes sense. Fractional is always a good one. And the owners,
I think also
right?
building that knowledge, right? If you can't afford to go buy the knowledge, right, you need to build that knowledge, right? And you build that knowledge through one of a few different ways. Either you're going to take your key performers and start sending them to industry conferences to start learning the lingo and how to talk to, someone in the restaurant industry and actually talk about spoilage and their inventory issues versus just saying, normal accounting terminology, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way that you start. It starts with identifying the people with their passion, but I don't think it has to be the people that won't get off the phone. I think that there's a lot of really great talent that are very shy, and they're shy from the perspective of they don't think they know or can add value. And as firm leaders, it's our role to empower them to understand that they have so much value to add. They just need to get in the ring and start trying it. I mean, for me, my first 2 years of going to networking events, I stood next to the partner of the firm and I didn't say a word for 2 years, right? Until I felt like I knew enough to contribute to the conversation. But a lot of these performers who are in doing the work, whether it's 1.0, 2.0, whatever they're doing right now, they have that knowledge. They're just too afraid to fail, right? So we have to give them that safety cushion to know that, hey, you might fail. Hey, you might go talk to someone, you lose a client because of it, but you're trying, and that's how you're going to learn and build that muscle, like I said before, because we can't go out and buy it, right?
I think that's a really good point.
I agree that I would definitely work those people up. I probably wouldn't use those people as my pilot program. I would want to get a pilot out there that I know is at least, I don't know.
It depends if you have those people.
True,
right?
true.
Like I just bought a firm and there was one person working there. She's very shy, but she knows her stuff. She doesn't like talking to people, but I've been having conversations with her, and I think it goes back to the individual coaching and career path planning for our team members, and actually saying, it's basically CAS for our internal team, right? What do you want out of your career, and how can I help you get there? You want to try tax and you're not in tax? Great, let's start having you involved in some tax conversations. Maybe you just sit on the Zoom call that I'm having with these 10 clients and you just listen to what I'm saying so you learn how to talk differently, than how you're talking today. And I think that's that's that upskilling conversation, right?
That's
Getting
why
back
you
to
get
that.
me to not
Leaving
be
it
a
up
part
to
of that.
them. You're leaving it up to them to opt in versus forcing the issue with somebody that's not a good fit.
Right, and I think that's true even when we look at our clients, right? You don't want a client who's not a good fit for the way you do business, right? We talk about firing clients all the time, right? You don't want a team member who hates their job. You want someone passionate or someone who can get behind the idea of building something with you as a small firm, right? And getting that buy-in from your team members, from your clients, from fractional people in industry that you know to get that experience. It's about building that team around something that doesn't exist today.
We are going to take one more quick break to hear a word from our sponsor, CPA.com, and then we'll be back with the third CPE code for this session. So we'll be right back.
Gain a new level of distinction and security with .cpa, a restricted domain exclusively for individually licensed CPAs and CPA firms. Enhance client trust with a verified web identity. Strengthen your brand with a more relevant URL. Join the thousands of firms that have already secured their unique .cpa domain. What's your .cpa? Discover it today.
And we are back. And we would like you to look at the bottom of your screen where you will see the third CPE code for this session. Be sure to record that code, and you've got all the codes you need now for CPE. You could leave, but technically, we would like you to stay for the last couple minutes. We haven't even touched on technology, but technology is a big part of having a CAS practice, and particularly since we're talking a lot about CAS 2.0 and going into advisory, what kind of tools, you don't have to name names, but what kind of tools do you need that can help you do the advisory stuff so you don't have to make it up?
Anything with insights. I'm just going to kind of throw out there something that's got some sort of insights, something bigger than what you have right now. There's some great tools out there that just pull all the data in from everywhere and just give you reports. But just don't throw those reports at your clients. They don't want to see them. That's not advisory.
Right, they want you to have the conversation
Yes,
around
they
the
want
reports,
you to
right?
tell them, not just send it to them.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say, and we talked about this earlier, about the easiest technology win is at that transactional level to automate away that data entry, the lowest level, least value added tasks that your team is doing that they probably hate doing, in all reality, to free them up to start learning and thinking about things differently. So if they have 5 hours allocated to some client to do something, if normally they spent 4.5 doing the work, you could flip that on their head and have 30 minutes doing the work because the technology is helping them, and then 4.5 hours of thinking about it. Same time outlay for us as the firm owners, but now they're just using their brain very differently, and that should translate into very different conversations.
And the billable hour or the billable rate is a lot higher than the transactional.
If you're billing by hour.
Well, even the fixed fee, we decided we're not getting into that. Even the fixed fees is so much higher at advisory level than it is bookkeeping or transactional.
Right.
Yeah, I would add just on the technology front, I think, you can look at it in a couple of ways. There's client-facing technology. There's also the internal technology. So I think, regardless of what size firm you are, probably more important if you're a sole practitioner, you need to have a good project tracking, automation tool so that you can be consistent in the tasks, not just throughout the processing and the servicing, but even the implementation process, so you can kind of see all those projects that are coming through. And then from a technology, client-facing technology stack, I think, having a consistent setup in GL and the design and chart of accounts, but then, spend management tools, and if you're getting into the financial planning and analysis aspect, there's a lot of great solutions out there, like you said, for business intelligence as well. So I think those are some of the key categories.
My project management tool is everything. It's on my phone. I use it for all my companies, my personal life. Everything is my project management tool. If it's not in there, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, agreed. I think also to that point, right, it's about knowing the technology stack that you want to use, right, and doing that upfront legwork and research so that when a client comes in with a challenge, you know the answer in 2 seconds, right? It's not first, let me go find out something for the next 3 weeks and then learn how to use it for the next 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, 6 months has gone by and you haven't delivered any value.
Gail, I'm having deja vu. I feel like we just talked about this at 9 a.m. this morning.
It's very possible. And tomorrow we have a project management discussion if you want to join tomorrow afternoon. But yeah, I think those are key things to the technology workflow, right?
And what are the challenges, or what can go wrong?
We don't have enough time.
Throw a rock. Throw a rock. Anything human that humans touch can go wrong. Anything. We're just terrible. No, anything that is not like odd, and then of course the data comes from there. So that. I don't want to think about that.
I would say, it's all about people, process, technology.
Yeah.
The technology is going to work, but if the people are adverse to the change, or your process isn't one that's kind of set up to be supported by that technology, then I would say it's not the technology challenge, it's the change management around those other things.
Absolutely. It's anything human that humans have interaction with is what can go wrong. The software don't care. It's going to do what it does, and it's going to do what we tell it to do. It's the people that are like, I don't want to do that, and then you have to deal with that crisis. So.
I think another big thing that tends to go wrong is people, at least in larger firms, right? They don't see that ROI on a new piece of software that they invest in, typically because they're using like 5% of the features of that software and not the 90% they were sold on. So that's one of the big things I see, not going well is they don't use enough of the functionality of a software because they haven't done the right research beforehand. They haven't put the right processes in to support it, or had a technology champion to really dive into it to then teach other people how to use it. So then you get into this, I'm using 5% of a software but paying for 100% of it. I don't see any ROI, and then they stop using it. And then they go back to old processes.
And then you get back to the staffing question about having someone have it be their job to work on the technology. So.
Man, it's like you guys thought out all of these sessions, like how they'd flow together, because I'm having so much deja vu sitting here. Yeah, Gail. Seems like you're experienced here.
All right, any final thoughts about CAS and re-envisioning a CAS practice?
I would just say, from sole practitioner through large firm, this category is a great opportunity. There's a lot of demand coming from it. This is a strategic decision by businesses, not a cost savings one. So think about, you can bill your value here. This is not a fee pressure situation if you do it right. And I think it's just a really great category that's needed by so many small businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Find your passion, find what you love, make it happen. Don't wait. Will Smith's robots are coming to take over our job as much as they can. So if you don't get in it now, you're going to be behind. And then when everybody's a trusted advisor, how are you now a trusted advisor? So absolutely just make the jump and have confidence. And like I said, find out what you're passionate about and start with that.
Yeah. And I would just echo both of those things, but also you probably don't realize that your clients want this already, right? With the transition I'm going through with this firm, half the clients have already come to me saying, I'm so happy that you offer these services because I've been wanting these for years, but didn't know how to bring it up in my previous conversation, or a previous relationship. So I think just starting it, and you'll realize that more people want it than less.
I just sent Alexandra, who's managing our Q&A, a link to the CAS benchmark survey. So we can put that up there for all of you to download if you want to take a look at that.
Got it.
Got
Okay.
it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I was like,
it was on the spur of the
she was
moment.
trying to do some kind of sign language
signaling, and it wasn't
thing.
working. We don't have that sign language down yet.
I'm just going to close with I like to share things like comments from the audience, and when we're talking about the coach versus an advisor, I liked this and didn't get to say it earlier, which is a coach helps you swing a bat, and an advisor will help you pick out the right bat to swing.
I love that.
That's so good. Thank
that.
you, whoever contributed that. All right. So, did we get that posted?
I'm doing
Okay,
this
so
right
stick
now.
with us for just a moment while we get this, so we can share this with you.
Thinking.
If you're just tuning in, I just sound terrible.
Yep.
Nobody knows.
Just sense.
Okay, all right. So if you'd like to download that survey that Kalil was mentioning, it's there. You can also search for the AICPA 2022 CAS Benchmark Survey and find it yourself. That's what I did. So anyway, thank you all so much for this panel. It was a really great discussion. We will see you back at the top of the hour with our next session, which is on tax credits if you're a parent. So we will see you then.